Welcome to Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance on the Central Coast, joined today by Chris Ungar. He is the president of the California School Boards Association, an elected member of the school district known as San Luis Coastal Unified School District. And we have seen the school establishment rocked yet again. As you know, in June 2014, a superior court in Los Angeles ruled that the teacher tenure system, which gave tenure after 2 years, was unconstitutional. The seniority trumps performance system was unconstitutional. And the appellate system for teachers was unconstitutional, should they be terminated. A court of appeal reversed.
Yes, absolutely. So let's think about that at first. So the first thing they said was that the 2-year tenure period, which really works out to be about 16 to 18 months, because in California, for a certificated person who's not making standard, you've got to give them a layoff notice by March 15th. Right. So what would happen is somebody, perhaps a young teacher, somebody would come in, they would get through their first year. A young teacher, a new teacher, they have a lot to learn. You get to your second year, you basically have about 6 to 7 months to really demonstrate that you're a proficient teacher, or the school district basically owns you forever.
Well,
so that's the first part.
Or the reverse. The teacher owns the school district. I mean, think about it.
Well,
a teacher, they go to college for 4 years.
Right, yeah.
So they're 22 when they graduate. They take a year to get their certificate, let's say. They're 23. They get a job right away. At the age of 25, they have been given lifetime tenure.
Well, it's not. I think there's some confusion about that. So it's not tenure in the sense of a college professor getting tenure with academic freedom. There's no such thing as academic freedom in the public schools. But what happens is you accrue due process rights. And it's the due process rights that make it extremely difficult for an incompetent or a less than competent teacher to be released.
And I appreciate
prior to that, following that,
and your clarification
that
is
time
accurate.
period.
But here's the challenge. So what the court said, the court that reversed the lower court decision,
the appeals court,
what they said is, and I think this is very telling, they said, it's not our job to decide if the law is a good idea.
Right.
It's our job to decide if the law is constitutional. And they said the law is constitutional.
Right.
Maybe the implementation is not done wisely. Maybe the law is not a good idea. But sir, if you're having a court of appeal saying it's not our job to decide if the law is a good idea, in other words, the law is a bad idea. That's what the court of appeals is saying.
I actually see. I read it a little bit differently. What I got was. We're not going to get into this argument about whether or not these are good laws. These are the laws. The problem is they're not implemented correctly. So if you have different laws and you have different ways of implementing them, that's a legislative issue. This needs to go back to the legislature.
Right, and that's exactly what they were saying.
That is exactly what they were saying. So I think what they were saying is, and as a school administrator, that makes it very difficult because what they're saying is, we have these laws. So Mr. and Mrs. School District, you need to abide by the laws as they're written. On the other hand, you've got a collective bargaining agreement. Your collective bargaining agreement, in many ways, determines how those laws are implemented, along with some administrative regulations or board policy. State law always trumps collective bargaining agreements, but collective bargaining agreements can be very, very structured, very complicated, and setting up these rules for things like how do you lay people off. So that's where this collision becomes. Essentially, what the state court said was, it's an administrative problem that. In the way this law is being implemented.
Look, here's the challenge, I would say. The Republicans in the legislature are agitating on Vivara.
Right. Yeah.
And one could argue that they are agitating in such a way that suburban moms are hearing what they're saying. We know in North Carolina, tenure was eliminated. We know in Wisconsin, they essentially limited dues collection.
Well, I was going to say, they eliminated collective bargaining, really.
And so that causes some challenges. In New York, in Michigan, there are challenges a la Vivara. we are getting to a point where, because of our permissive initiative rules, there could be an initiative on the ballot that would eliminate teacher tenure. Now, there was an attempt back in 2005 to do that, and the voters declined.
It was rejected. It was one of Schwarzenegger's package, piece of Schwarzenegger's package.
Mr. Schwarzenegger was not so popular back in 2005. So, my question becomes, where do the adults go on this? Because the court essentially said we need some type of legislative solution, and all we got in the wake of Vergara was a bill which allowed for a more rapid dismissal for serious offenses conducted by teachers: attempted murder, sexual assault, drug offenses. There was nothing about ineffective teachers.
Right, and that really brings to mind a couple of things we need to think about. So the first question is, what's an ineffective teacher? Which means, it actually sort of goes back to those administrative things we were talking about, which means you as a school district had better have good teacher support. You better have an effective evaluation system that really helps screen out the good teachers versus the teachers that aren't doing so well. And then you've got to have a way of saying, we need to have the structures in place to support good teaching, and if we have less than good teaching, how can we help people become better teachers? And given all that, then we start thinking about dismissal.
Let's talk about teacher evaluations, because look, in the final analysis, there are many factors which go into evaluating a teacher. One of those can be standardized test scores.
Right.
And of course, I would never suggest that standardized test score should be the sole basis, because the teachers get who they get. They can only. But the teachers' representatives have been less than willing to include standardized tests in their evaluation structure.
And it's a really interesting thing, because that really does become a local issue. Are the local association and the administration willing to, can they come to agreement that this is something that would be an appropriate part of a teacher evaluation? Now, interestingly enough, in California, it is required. And so there are arguments now in California.
A court said so, but in the end,
well, it actually goes back to one of the teacher bills that determined who is a teacher, how do you become a teacher, how do you evaluate
one of your sister districts, Lucia Moore, in this San Luis Obispo County, I think they have a structure whereby they did or do.
I believe they do, and that was a part of it. That was a part of it, student achievement, and it's difficult. Now, the thing that's tough is, do you judge a teacher's performance? And I don't think you should do this based on a single score of a standardized test.
I don't think most people would agree.
How do you look at teacher performance? And I think that's one of the big challenges. And most teachers will say to you, if we have a bad teacher, that teacher needs to go, because it's bad for kids and it sullies the whole teaching profession.
That doesn't happen.
But the associations,
it doesn't happen.
You're right, it doesn't. And part of it is because the associations are required by law to represent their teachers, represent the contract. So if you have a bad teacher, the association must make sure that due process is being followed.
What does the CSBA say?
CSBA believes, and we did file an amicus brief in Vergara, we think the tenure period is too short. We think that it should be easier to release teachers who aren't doing their jobs. And I mean, frankly, do we have a problem with last in, first out? I think we should be looking at teacher effectiveness and student needs.
We'll come back and talk more about it.
Absolutely.
This is an issue that is not going away.
It is not going away.
His name is Chris Ungar. He's president of the California School Boards Association. I'm Brad Pomerance on the Central Coast. It's Charter Local Edition.